that the leaders of the charge for expansive fiscal policy this year, in 2020, are none other than the flinty-eyed economists of the IMF, formerly the high priests and chief theologians of austerity. As the Financial Times put it in an editorial commending this historic turnaround, coronavirus has led to economic disruption on a scale not seen since the Second World War. As was the case after 1945, state investment is necessary to rebuild economies and provide jobs. The IMF's message is that premature fiscal tightening in the aftermath of the crisis will harm, not heal, economies. It is one that ought to be welcomed and heeded by politicians. I could not have put it better myself. This is the right policy for the world. It is the right policy for Canada. And it is one that this Canadian politician is very committed to heeding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very thoughtful and comprehensive comments. The minister has agreed to take a few questions, and I have and I have three, if I might. In your remarks, you talk about how well Canada was prepared going into this pandemic. In DBRS Morningstar's analysis to support our AAA rating, we say, amongst other things, and I quote, "These credit challenges arising from the pandemic are offset by Canada's considerable fundamental strengths, including its sound macroeconomic policy framework, a large and diverse economy, and strong governing institutions." We go on to say, and I quote, "In our view, the federal government has space to provide temporary fiscal stimulus of this size while maintaining the AAA rating," end of quote. I wonder how, you touched on this towards the end of your comments, but I wonder how you think about the duration of the crisis and its potential to require greater support for longer than forecast.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the question, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak here today. Thank you, Doug, if I may, for quoting from that report. I read it with great interest when it first came out on September 22nd. I think I even quoted it in the House of Commons. As you noted, I was careful in my prepared remarks to underscore that our expansive fiscal policy is limited and it must be temporary. Now, you're quite right to point out that none of us has a crystal ball. We need to maintain this expansive policy until we have done two things. The first one is getting on top of the coronavirus. We have to flatten the curve, and we have to support individual Canadians and Canadian businesses while we are taking the necessary actions to do that. And there is then going to be a second step, and I touched on that today, and I'm going to have more to say in the days to come. And that is, we are also experiencing a coronavirus recession. And we are going to have to build our way out of that recession. That will require government investment. That government investment is going to need to be smart. It's going to need to be thoughtful. It's going to need to be carefully targeted and time limited. And it's going to need to be focused on getting Canadians back to work. In the throne speech, we promised to support Canadians as they create 1 million new jobs. There are about 750,000 Canadians who don't have a job today, who had one before coronavirus struck. We're all going to have to work hard, including the federal government, with investments to get those Canadians back to work, and we will do this. But I do want to emphasize these are two very time-limited tasks, and we very much understand that they need to be time-limited.
Thank you. For our conference attendees, you should know that the minister and I didn't compare notes before this, and so she doesn't know what questions I'm asking. However, your response is a nice on-ramp to my second question, and that's with respect to climate change. Clearly, it is shaping up to be the defining issue of our generation. Every jurisdiction is struggling, in many cases, to even achieve consensus on whether it's occurring and what's causing it, much less how to address it. What role do you see your government playing in driving public and private entities to adapt and to meet the challenges?
Well, thank you for the question. And for sure, we didn't compare notes, but I did read the DBRS Morningstar report carefully when you first issued it. It was very, very well done, really useful. And so maybe I had a bit of a hint of what your thinking might be. On climate change, a really core question. Let me start where you started, Doug, which is we have an advantage today in Canada compared to some other countries in that I think we have at this point a broad consensus across the country that climate change is real, that we must act urgently, and even that there is real economic opportunity in acting urgently. The whole world is moving towards a clean and green economy, and we need to be sure that Canada isn't left behind, that we are positioned, that our businesses, our people are positioned to take advantage of that move to a green economy. What does the government have to do? I think the government needs to do a few things. The first is to create the right incentives for Canadians and Canadian companies to do the right thing. And that's why the price on pollution that our government has introduced is so important. You know, economists across the political spectrum are agreed that a price on pollution is the single most effective way to get people to change their behaviors and to move to a green economy. And what is so important about the Canadian approach is this price on pollution is revenue neutral. All the money goes back to Canadians as it should. So that's a very important thing for the government to do. And then I think a second really important thing is we have to make investments to help individual Canadians and Canadian businesses shift to a green economy. And an important and to me really exciting example I would offer you is the investment by the Government of Canada, by the Province of Ontario, to help Ford build electric cars in Canada. The auto sector is such an important part of our economy, such an important source of jobs and growth, and helping our car sector to shift to electric and zero emission vehicles is one example of how we shift our whole economy. And I can't resist adding that the rules of origin in NAFTA and the provisions for car exports to Europe included in our CETA trade deal with Europe have both provided a very important underpinning for that decision by Ford to build those vehicles here in Canada.
Thank you. My last question really comes from the opportunity of addressing you directly. And I know that our conference attendees wouldn't want to miss this opportunity. But I also know that you're an experienced enough diplomat that you're not going to probably give me a direct answer as to the outcome of the U.S. election. I guess what I would like to understand is how you think about the impact on the Canadian economy of either outcome.
You know, you always know as a politician that when someone praises you as a diplomat while asking a question, they're really hoping you will be undiplomatic. And I'm afraid I'm not going to satisfy that desire. But it's a really, really important question. I referred in my remarks to that old saying, when the U.S. sneezes, Canada catches cold. I really like the idea that we're getting to a stage where when the U.S. sneezes, we build antibodies. But my reference to the United States was intentional, because you can't talk about the Canadian economy without talking about the American economy. We all know that. And, you know, the Prime Minister has said, and he's quite right, that one of the principal jobs of a Prime Minister is to manage, to effectively handle that relationship with the US. And that is true of any Canadian federal government. In our first mandate, and indeed up to now, that has been a central, necessarily central focus and preoccupation of our government, and it will continue to be. What I would like to assure Canadians is, just as in 2016, we prepared then carefully for any possible election outcome. And I can tell you, in 2016, the day after the election, I was so happy to have on my desk, prepared by Canada's outstanding trade negotiators, a report they had prepared in August of 2016, talking about what Canada's position should be should a new U.S. administration seek to renegotiate NAFTA. That was very important, that they had anticipated that possibility and that we were ready to go. And likewise, when it comes to the U.S. election next week, either outcome will be significant for Canada. We have spent a lot of time carefully analyzing what either outcome would mean. We have a fantastic ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, in Washington, and we all work closely with her. So, you know, Canadians know this election will have an impact on us, but it's not our decision. What our job is to be as well positioned as possible to react to their outcome. Maybe I should say to any possible outcome. And I might just conclude, Doug, by saying what is so important, and I think has been central to Canada's handling of the challenges we faced from the United States in recent years, like the NAFTA negotiation, has been the Team Canada approach people across the country have taken. Mayors, premiers, critically, business leaders, labor leaders. And I have every expectation that that is the approach our country will continue to take when it comes to dealing with the U.S. And I have to say, I think that's the approach that we've been taking together when it comes to fighting the coronavirus. And it has been an essential part of our response.